And hello, everybody. Welcome to Narrative Live. It's a good show we have for you tonight. We're going to talk about Tucker Carlson, really what happened with that firing, what is going on at Fox News, what will happen to Fox News. Let's get your thoughts first, Eric, on the departure of Tucker Carlson. I know you'll miss him.
I'm really going to miss him. He seemed great.
He's a good guy.
That's a line. It's one of my favorite lines from the end of Deadpool 2, after one of the bad guys gets it in a particularly spectacular splatter. Deadpool says very dry, I'm going to miss him. He seemed great. So it's very interesting. You have a Russian spy cell that gets popped in St. Louis for improperly trying to influence U.S. elections. And Fox News has to pay out almost $1 billion for trying to influence the perception of U.S. elections. And then a business day later, then Tucker Carlson's gone, but also Don Lemon from CNN's gone. BuzzFeed News disappears out of nowhere.
I'm glad you're doing all this because this is really interesting. It's a whole bunch of things that have gone on together at the same time, and we might want to go through each of those separately.
Nate Silver's podcast and website apparently is biting the dust,
and his job,
that's an influence operation. Yeah, so people will have to be unoriginal, wrong, and boring on their own.
I've not heard about the Don Lemon angle, to be honest, but maybe there is one there. But certainly when it comes to Tucker Carlson, when it comes to BuzzFeed, when it comes to Nate Silver, each of those, it's hard to avoid noticing that they have some foreign influence. You might say it's foreign intelligence influence. I'd probably agree with you, but I don't have any hard proof of that. But certainly that there's a lot of unusual editorial decisions.
BuzzFeed particularly, first of all, that's an organization that had reporters that were seducing staff members of intelligence committees in U.S. Congress and trading sexual favors for classified intelligence. I have no problem trading sexual favors. I think it's something people should do. It's the injection of the classified defense information that's a felony to traffic. That's the problem. And that's the kind of organization BuzzFeed was. They also published their version without really any authentication of the origin or the integrity of what we call the Steele dossier, which it's been suggested to me that what if that wasn't really Steele's dossier, or it was lots of it, or in every kind of Russian-y sort of disinformation campaign, you leave some in, you add some that wasn't there, and you take some out. BuzzFeed not only fed out the Steele dossier on the exact day that the intelligence community came out to talk about the foreign influence in the 2016 election. It then turned around and immediately started smearing people that were actual professionals and not juvenile Brooklyn journalist types who actually knew what they're talking about in national security.
There's been questions about BuzzFeed, and there have certainly been questions about Tucker Carlson. And tonight on MSNBC, the producer who was fired from and who's currently suing Fox News, Abbey Grossberg, did an exclusive interview with Nicole Wallace. It's a fascinating interview. And in fact, so far, all the headlines have sort of missed the story. The interview was really well done by Nicole, so she deserves credit for that. But the actual lead in the story, I think everyone's missing, is the thing she was doing as she was about to get fired. And the things that she's been deposed about was the January 6th tapes. These are the tapes that Tucker Carlson got from the Speaker of the House. Kevin McCarthy gave him 40,000 hours, or maybe it's less than 40,000 hours, we're now hearing, of tapes, so he could formulate his own version of what happened on January the 6th, which in this case...
Oh, that's right.
Which in this case was basically that it was a bunch of FBI informants that really did January the 6th. It wasn't insurrectionists. It was people pretending to be Proud Boys, but were actually FBI agents who did January 6th. That is not the case. In fact, just if anyone's wondering, there's no FBI. Well, I mean, there might have been FBI informants.
Let's give this a little bit of oxygen and latitude here. The FBI sometimes does tricky stuff. They have people pose inside of cults, mob families for years to decades. So they do tricky stuff, but that's all classified. It's all confidential. It's all closely held so people don't die. And that's not journalism. That's espionage.
Yeah, but it's not. These insurrectionists were real insurrectionists, the Proud Boys, and we saw it on TV. We could see what was going on. That was not a bunch of FBI informants.
The great thing about having had hundreds to over 1,000 prosecutions here, many of which are guilty pleas, at any time, if those guys are like, hold on, I actually work for the Department of Justice. I am a U.S. government employee, and I should not be prosecuted. They've all had the opportunity for that. I think it would be malfeasance or misfeasance at any rate if the FBI didn't have some people in there, if DHS didn't have some people on the ground. Of course they did. But and the idea that this is entirely a figment of our federal imaginations, then who are the 1,000 people that just pleaded guilty? Because if, that dude actually worked for the FBI, one, I don't know how he made his physical, because, a lot of those guys didn't look like they were going to get to 80 sit-ups at any point soon. And they could have bailed out, but they didn't, because they're not FBI agents, they're not feds, and they did attempt to overthrow the U.S. government. And you can tell because saying that you worked for the FBI the whole time is a really way to get out, really good way of getting out of prison, which many people want to do. If you can get out of prison, you will, especially, sorry, I was actually on mission for the U.S. government. Please don't put me in federal pen. That's something a lot of people would do. And not go, fuck it, I'm just going to go to upstate New York and go.
I mean, they're not going to just good. People don't choose jail, is what you're saying. And in this case, there might have been some informants, absolutely. But Tucker's point was that the whole thing was really about FBI informants in the Proud Boys starting an insurrection and lying, I don't know, whatever it is.
That's further sedition.
This is why I think he's been fired. I'm going to play you these clips by Abbey Grossberg. And this is the premise tonight, is I think what they have seen coming, having just had this really awful settlement that's to $787 million or something like that.
That's nothing for narrative, but that can really add up after a while.
Yeah, especially for Fox. So, but imagine they've got another one of these coming. So this was just a libel case. But what if they've actually got a potential thing coming in their legal future that could involve Tucker Carlson actually being involved somehow, which would involve Fox News directly in covering up the events of January the 6th? In some sort of conspiracy? Now that is a whole other matter. That is a very serious matter, because who's he defrauding then? American people. That's not just a check you have to write. That's a crime.
Yeah, and if I can just detail the four corners of conspiracy charges, especially a fairly large conspiracy, you do not have to know every part of a conspiracy or have your hands in every part of a conspiracy in order to be charged criminally in a conspiracy. You need to have had a meeting of the minds and known that you were doing at least your part of it, and then you have to have taken acts in furtherance of that conspiracy, but you do not need to know every part of it and to have understood the gravity of what you're doing.
Yeah.
If the totality of what you're doing helped seditious conspiracy, then you can catch a seditious conspiracy charge, because that is how conspiracy charges work. You just got to do your part, and you can be in real trouble. And this is pretty close to that definition.
Let me remind you that this man, you have Kevin McCarthy, chose only Tucker Carlson of the entire media to give 40,000 hours of surveillance tape, which belongs to the American people, of what happened on January the 6th. So Tucker Carlson could stitch together his own version of events that happened on January the 6th to counteract what the committee had found out in their report.
And may I get law dorky here too?
Yeah.
That's assuming that none of McCarthy's people or McCarthy didn't change any part of those documents. Now, if you start altering public record, you can go pretty close to, I think, 18 U.S. Code 1519 charge. That's 20 years. If you start screwing around with something that's being investigated, if you change the documents themselves.
Well, what if you gave it to somebody that might be working for under the influence of a foreign intelligence agency? What if
that's espionage?
Yeah. What if you
that is espionage? Right? That's espionage. Mm-hmm. And if you create a false version of something, that's forgery. They're in a bucket of syrup because they were trying to overthrow the U.S. government.
Right? We're just looking around the edges.
No, we're not. We're actually not. No, we watched them try and overthrow the government. They said, we're going to overthrow the government. We have long guns. We're going to occupy these buildings. That's violent insurrection. We know that. And we know these guys destroy records. We know they alter documents. They create their own versions of things. And this is a criminal investigation. And that's the thing. Once there's a federal investigation rolling, that's why I bring up 1519 in Title 18. Once there's an investigation rolling, if you start screwing with the records in any way, impeding any of that, boy, you're in 20-year prison sentence land. The feds don't like that. Then there's your general 371 Title 18 felonies that are just generalized conspiracy against the United States. Anything where you're screwing around and trying to harm the United States interest, and that can be interpreted quite broadly by a criminal prosecutor, yeah, that's a 5-year per, up to 20-year per, depending on what you're doing. So these guys they're seditionists.
Well, they are. And let's not forget that Kevin McCarthy has lobbyists in his immediate circle with close ties to some of these foreign countries as well. There's been some speculation that he's very heavily influenced by some lobbyists with close ties to Israel.
The Jeff Miller fellow is...
You're going to mention names.
Comes to mind.
You're so good at this. All right, so let's listen to what Abbey Grossberg told Nicole Wallace today.
Tucker was very set on finding an FBI person who was implanted in the crowd and spinning this conspiracy that they were ultimately the ones responsible for the Capitol attack, not Fox News, as they're about to go into the Dominion trial, that it was really the FBI that set up this thing, not Fox telling the American people that the election was rigged and the voting machines did it. And when I went back to them and said, look, there's no conspiracy theory here, I called this attorney that's representing one of the Proud Boys, and he flat out told me on 2 occasions, there is no conspiracy. Get away from this stuff. This is dangerous. Tell Tucker to stop. I'll come on your show and represent my client, but I absolutely will walk off if he asks me this. And the response was, well, find somebody else. Tucker is really intent on this. And that wore on my mental health, too, because by that time, I had really begun to connect the dots that the programming that we were putting on the air every night was not just generating business, but also generating hatred in the audience. And after January 6th, I had this wake-up moment that this is hurting people. People are getting angry, and people are acting out on that anger, and this is not okay, and I don't want to be part of that.
It sounds like Tucker Carlson, despite having his own producers, his own senior producers saying, there is no story here. There is no FBI informant here that somehow magically created this insurrection, and you're chasing a dead end. And yet he went ahead and still ordering his editorial staff to continue to find this. Now, I didn't see the final product that Fox News put out, Tucker Carlson put out on that day. And I don't know if they actually finally alleged as much as she's saying that they did. But there was this character, this Mr. Epps guy, who was wrongly identified as being some sort of informant, and he's not. The FBI has flat out said, absolutely not. He's been on 60 Minutes this week and said the same thing. And yet Tucker Carlson's basically created a mythology around this man, and a mythology around January the 6th that would have potentially convinced his very influential audience. He's got his biggest cable news show in the United States. All those people believe what he says, would have convinced them that the FBI were actually responsible for the insurrection of January the 6th.
It's not about influential audience. It's interesting that they have so many people watching this, and that one guy, Mike Lindell, with the damn pillow thing, he's the one who has to put up 40% of the cash for this. Yeah. Something tells me that's not all from pillow sales. It's just a thought. So these guys are all this influential. They're so influential, but no regular businesses want to pay money to advertise there. Look, Fox is going away, thank God. It's not going to survive under the weight of all the various operations it's run, because they're not just in criminal territory, because that needs to rise to a pretty high level. Certainly when you start messing around with the Speaker of the House, you're in some conspiracy territory that it's criminal. Yeah. But there's also, these are civil penalties. That's what really happened with Dominion, is they said, our company depends on our reputation. And you just ruined our reputation. Our reputation is that if you buy our stuff, you're going to have a secure election. And we have technology and techniques and personnel. We're better than the average government employee. We're specialized in this, and if that sounds somehow weird or creepy, don't forget that our space rockets and jet fighters are also contracted on the same basis. Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics and Northrop Grumman, we all agree that they are better at making fighter airplanes than the General Services Administration or the Department of Agriculture at making jet planes, right? So there's specialized, we have private contractors for stuff all the time. You got to keep a good leash on them, I think, but that's normal. These guys are like, this news company just destroyed the value of our company because we worked long and hard to have our reputation. Just to interject, this is a sensitive subject for me, given that when I said, hey, everyone look at Russian intelligence doing some stuff, my reputation was assassinated and it cost me a lot of money. And most everybody will tell you the same thing. When they run into these defamation machines, these reputation assassins, that's what they're there to do. They're there to take your money. They're there to make you miserable and embarrass you in front of your community. And that is what Tucker Carlson is doing, only he's picking the FBI.
Yeah.
Now, they already did Dominion and Smartmatic, and Dominion came and said, so we make $200,000 a year, 7 times earnings would be about the net present value of our company, and that'd be about $1.6 billion. So pay us that. And Fox settled out with 60% of that, which they basically knew they were going to lose. It was going to be even worse. Smartmatic apparently is going to kick their asses even harder. And so that's the civil stuff here. So Tucker Carlson and Kevin McCarthy have moved on to trying to defame the law enforcement function.
And defraud American people. They basically are setting up a perception that the American elections do not work, that the entire event was imagined. The Department of Justice doesn't work.
The Department of Justice is there to harm American democracy. Yeah. That makes them kind of enemies of the Republic.
Yeah.
This is sedition.
Yeah.
This is sedition. And this is not the same thing as whistleblowing. And this is not the same thing as reporting where, look, we need the media in general. We need somebody telling the stories of, hey, I don't understand these guys. I understand they're powerful and all that. But some people here are abusing our trust. They're abusing their oaths. And I'm going to expose this at great risk. We need that in a free republic. And we're going to need that for forever. That's the fight in democracy doesn't go away. I think that's something we've learned. You take your eye off the ball there, you're in for trouble. That is a hallowed democratic function, and that is not what Fox News does. That is certainly not what Tucker Carlson has done. And I wonder if there hasn't been more inquiry into just exactly what happened with Kevin McCarthy, interference, a conspiracy to interfere with the public perception of the January 6th events.
There hasn't been enough scrutiny of this, and there really needs to be scrutiny because, I think this is ultimately why there's other reasons, and I'll show you the others in a minute, but the big overriding reason I think that they've done this to Tucker and his producer is because they know, as we know here on Narrative, as we've been reporting, that they have exposure to intelligence operations in News Corp at Fox, and that Rupert Murdoch has been tied to these intelligence operations, whether it's the American ones or the Israeli ones or others. He's been involved in those. So now if his staff at these networks are also carrying out operations for foreign intelligence, like he has in the past, then it becomes very, very personally liable, what's the word I'm looking for, personally challenging for Rupert Murdoch himself, because he can no longer hide behind. He's typically doing here what he's done with every other scandal, is blame the editors, blame the people, the reporters on the ground, blame the anchors. He's got to fire as many of them as they can, but nothing ever touches him. Nothing ever touches him or his family. And he's doing this again here. But it's not going to work so well here because we know, Rupert, we know that you're being involved with these intelligence operations over the last few decades. We've seen them. We know them. We're reporting them out right here on Narrative. This week on Narrative's Spy Murdoch, we're going to be getting even further into this cooperation, the apparent cooperation between two rivals, Robert Maxwell and Rupert Murdoch. Why were they cooperating? We know one of them was an Israeli spy. Maybe the other guy was an Israeli spy.
Probably the only guy who could have told us was Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, interesting. Rupert Murdoch could tell us too, I bet you. But, and he's got his own.
That's true.
He's got his own interests in Israel. He runs newspapers there. He's owned things that has the Jerusalem Post there. But he's certainly very close to Bibi Netanyahu, as we pointed out last week on this show.
Wait, is he Jerusalem Post?
I think he's Jerusalem Post. I better make sure on that, but I think he is. And then Bibi is trying to get him to buy Maya. If you remember that, we reported that last week. In 2015, 2016, it was Bibi who personally reached out to Rupert Murdoch and tried to negotiate a deal for this newspaper in Israel. So, prime ministers don't tend to do that. Presidents don't tend to call up and say, hey, will you buy a newspaper? It tends to be the newspapers that sell it to newspapers. So why is the Israeli prime minister, who's also has an intelligence operation pass, why is he asking Rupert Murdoch and James Murdoch to buy the #1 Israeli newspaper? And Mr. Milken, as we also reported last week, is a spy. Why is he involved in all of this? Why? How come he's involved? And so you've got, these are interesting questions, important questions, because if this is an Israeli operation, then that's a serious thing that Tucker Carlson, and maybe if Kevin McCarthy was involved in that, maybe that's a very serious thing that they did. Is that crazy what I'm saying? Am I making sense there? Does that make sense to you?
Right up the middle for me. But
yeah. It's not going to. It doesn't. When you start adding up these dots, it's where do you go? It's hard. It's disappointing to hear that the ally would do this to a country which has given Israel so much. In fact, I don't believe Israel would even exist without the United States of America. And so to have had that happen, and then to have this kind of like just broad scale manipulation, these lies, these operations happening to people like you and me personally, like we both suffered at the hands of these kinds of operations, also coincidentally tied to Rupert Murdoch's enterprise, or maybe not so coincidentally tied to Rupert Murdoch's enterprise. And then you've got all this stuff. So it certainly begs the question of, and certainly requires more investigation. Let's listen to Abbey Grossberg again now with Nicole Wallace from earlier on today.
It started sort of around the holiday period. I had a colleague who was Israeli, and they do this thing with HR where you become this global ambassador for Fox for the show, and you get $10,000 essentially to represent the program as a diversity ambassador, and the whole staff was white. So they recommended that he be that person because Israelis and Jews are minorities, and they first suggested it in a meeting, and then they brought it to him. I think he was shocked, and they said he could use that money to buy pizza for the whole staff for a year. Now, I know HR claims they did an investigation, and they said that some of these things were said, but the feelings about it in the office were different than me.
Is Abby there trying to come on and say that Fox is some big anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish?
No, I think she's saying that they were pushing this notion that there's an anti-Semitic thing that Tucker Carlson was pushing out there, that they were.
I remember a video between Sean Hannity and Jim Trafficant, who's a deceased congressman now, but I'm not sure if this had been sort of scrubbed from their archives, but I saw an old, I'm going to say 2009 or so, interview with Trafficant where he's a guy who went down for corruption, went to prison, got some mob ties. I heard there were Russian-y mob ties. And he's talking to Sean Hannity, and he's like, look, this is the deal. I'm a national security guy, and we're being harmed by going along with Israel. We're told that these guys are our allies, and they're not. And Sean Hannity turned himself inside out. That's just crazy. And Trafficant was a Republican, but when he stepped on that Israel nerve there, Sean Hannity knew that needed to get shut down. So I don't know, between that and Rupert Murdoch and the connections to to Maxwell, who's buried in Jerusalem, I don't know. I just don't. Given Fox News' role in pumping the Iraq War II electric boogaloo in 2003. I think if anyone's trying to push that somehow Fox is an anti-Likud property, I think the ladies doth protest too much.
Look, I think as well, we have to remember that things like Breitbart was started by Bibi Netanyahu. Breitbart's supposedly anti-Semitic at times as well, and anti-Israel at times, but really started by Bibi Netanyahu. There's
Steve Bannon and but goddamn, there are a lot of Nazis around this Netanyahu guy.
It seems to be
pretty interesting.
Pretty covered with them.
Harlan Crow is at the American Enterprise Institute, chock full of Jewish fellas, and nobody went, hey, this guy's got busts of Mussolini and Hitler and a bunch of Hitler dinnerware and stuff. Hitler napkins. If you go to his house, you're eating off Hitler napkins. Yeah. And nobody, it's just something's up here.
It's a really interesting point you're making because, the truth of it is this, maybe it's not a mirage, maybe it really existed, but this amplification of these sort of far right extremist views were created by Breitbart. That was Bibi Netanyahu's thing. There's the photograph. You see it.
The famous photograph of the guys all hanging out
in Jerusalem. Okay. Let's start Breitbart. So
they're Nazis.
Yeah, let's start the extreme right, the alt-right. That's where it began. And so this is the same crowd that Mr. Tucker Carlson is talking to. This is exactly the same group of people. In fact, did you hear her mention that there were only whites on staff? Because this was really their diversity play, right? They give $10,000 to the one person who's diverse in their staff, but there's no one diverse on their staff because they're all white. So they give it to the Israeli guy. I really want to know who he is, just because wouldn't that be interesting? So it's interesting that, firstly, that they had such awful perceptions of what a company diversity policy should be like and how they should be handling things and how awful they were in terms of that. But secondly, it raises a lot of questions about the kind of who in their right minds puts out that as a suggestion to a policy like that in a company. If you're running a company it's a serious enterprise, Fox News. It's not some small, tiny company. And this is how you're handling your stuff inside. This is your HR mechanisms inside by giving $10,000 to a Jewish guy because that's the minority. It's a bit offensive the way they operate.
It's interesting. I mean, that it's a bunch of white people is probably not surprising, but that you're like, let's find the one Israeli here and he's the diversity hire. I don't know. Sometimes I want to back off from the conspiracies and just go, also, Tucker sucked. He's not a journalist. He does not have information. He's one of the more irritating human beings that ever slithered across this planet surface. He's gone, and the media landscape and generally the world is better for it. So
I remember Tucker Carlson as a pretty good, decent conservative type, back in the day, on CNN. He was annoying, let's be honest, completely annoying, but his policies were very sort of mainstream conservative. Now suddenly in this iteration, he's become this incredible racist insurrectionist. It's just how did that all change in a person? Did people change that much that they would go from being the typical fiscal conservative to being a Nazi, basically, a right-wing person?
He's from an ultra-wealthy family. He's from the Swanson TV dinner family fortune, and he had no other accomplishments. He was put on TV because of family connections, and he's not a product of American meritocracy. He's a product of American autocratic elitism, and then he moved into trying to destroy the democracy out that the rest of us have to live under, and he's a threat to this country. And I hope he is prosecuted, and I hope he goes to prison, because the things he did are just as bad and worse than what Douglas Mackey did in the case that he was recently prosecuted for, where he was trying to stop black people from voting by putting out disinformation, say, hey, you can vote by text and other bits of information. And it was offensive, and he was prosecuted under 18 U.S. Code 241, which is conspiracy against civil rights. There are certain and established rights under the Constitution to vote, and he interfered with those. And I think that's on a much larger scale. That's what Tucker was doing, is he was trying to cast doubt upon whether or not we can land. The whole point of doing statistical projections in an election is all right, where are we at 9 p.m.? They have all these mathematicians go, look, we don't know exactly how many of this is going to be counted up, but this is the interval of confidence we have. When we see this in these precincts, this is the ultimate total. And we use science, we use the powers of the Enlightenment, of empirical evidence, and all that good stuff about civilization to say, all right, guys, by the end of that night, we're like, okay, this guy won. And then they don't know the exact outcome, but somebody makes a concession speech. And what's been going on, and this is the plan for Trump, who was planning on turning America into a bloodbath if he didn't win, because they didn't think he was going to win. Then he won. That peaceful transfer of power depends on somebody saying, all right, it looks like this guy won. And they get in touch with the campaigns and do you agree that I won? Yeah, okay, congratulations. I'm sure you're going to do the great in the job, you son of a bitch. And then they move on, and there's a victory speech, and then the transfer of power happens. And maybe there was some tomfoolery, but there is a transfer. And that is, okay, these are what the numbers say this week, or tonight. We opened the polls at 7 a.m., and we stopped voting at 7 or 5, 6, 7 p.m. I forget what it is. And then we count up, and we put that all together, especially on a presidential year. That depends on faith in the system. Attempting to destroy the faith in this, to go, no, you don't have to accept that. In fact, you can take up arms and kill people over it. That's sedition, and that is incitation. It's inciting violence. And I have a right as a citizen of this country. We have technology that can count up whether somebody voted for this guy or that guy for governor, right? We've got that technology. We've got it deployed. It is not up for debate. Is there screwing around? Yes. Will there always be? Unless we have something that's cryptologically, mathematically, utterly locked down, there's going to be messing around at the local level. But we still, and there always has been, we have to still put together a government and have a transfer of that power. And by him and the other people like him going, no, actually, I'd like all the people who own AR-15s to not believe this. I'm going to whip them up into violence. Other people are going to whip them up into violence. We're going to work together on this. We're going to say your vote didn't really count. You cannot have a new government as a result of your voting. You can't have one yet because I want these people to bring their weapons to Washington, D.C. and shoot everybody up.
Yeah.
And that's criminal activity. And Tucker Carlson needs to go to penitentiary over it.
You're absolutely right. They've segmented all these crimes into these like Fulton County crimes being one of them, and it's fine. That's the way they need to do it. If we pull back the whole thing, it's one giant conspiracy. It starts with the big lie, but it ends with January the 6th, part of continues beyond January the 6th. But it's all one giant conspiracy to subvert the vote, to take away the rights of Americans to vote, and to install some sort of dictatorship in America. That's just what it looks like. And so, who's involved in that? And is it, if there are people outside of America that are involved in it, who are they? And we might be able to add some names to who those people might be. And then you're asking, is this a foreign government plot to overthrow the elections in the United States? And we keep circling around this, but that's really what we're seeing from every angle. And this new angle here, this Abbey Grossberg, who's come forward with this testimony, it's quite chilling when you think about what she's saying about January the 6th there. And now there's another thing here that we're going to play another clip from her where she's talking about her experience working for Maria Bartiromo. She was the only producer on Maria Bartiromo's show, and Maria was really the one scapegoated, or attempted to be scapegoated, for the Dominion trial. She still works at Fox News, which is interesting, and the person who landed up going was Tucker Carlson, which is also interesting. So here's what Abby said.
I had been asked to spy on her by the Fox bosses and report back on what she was doing, which caused a lot of stress, and that was part of the reason I went to Tucker as well. I just physically and emotionally couldn't take it, and when I go back and listen to some of those tapes now that I hear the stress in my voice and how depleted I was. And
so you spied on Maria for your Fox bosses?
Yes. I not spied. I would tell them what she was doing. If there were things that concerned me, spy is the wrong word, that I had handled in the past myself because we had a good relationship and can work it out together. I reported those things because I became very paranoid about my job because I had been shaken down by multiple executives at the company that I had to cooperate. So that was part of the reason I went to Tucker as well. So I started
like a bigger star, a safer sort of harbor at the mothership.
I wouldn't say bigger star. I felt like maybe they would protect me. That was definitely part of it, that I wasn't protected where I was. Also being mindful of the fact that she was named in the Dominion suit. That was something on my mind too, that maybe if I can get away before that happens, I'll be protected. And I told them all of this.
And you come to think that Fox wants to scapegoat you and Maria for Dominion. How did you come to believe?
That was a gradual process. Very early, we're jumping timelines, but in November of 2021, that's about 8 or 9 months before this happened, I had a meeting with an executive at Fox Business who said to me, "You're responsible for this whole thing, for us being sued." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You didn't put up a full screen of Dominion." And I said, "I did put up their statement. Maria didn't choose to read it, but I did put it up." And he said, "You just didn't control her, and now this whole company is being sued." So that kind of stuck in my mind always. And Maria definitely knew that they were out to get her. They had been playing games and marginalizing us for years.
What do you think of that?
Lie down with dogs, get up with fleas.
Yeah. No
and how nice for MSNBC, which has absolutely no hostile foreign intelligence ties that we've discussed recently, to give such a wonderful platform to so many different fake national security non-experts, falsely reformed Republicans. We're talking about Tucker tonight, but the whole MSNBC thing, MSNBC is not much better than Fox. Yeah. It's just more subtle about it as far as I'm concerned. But
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of questions to be asked about MSNBC, but there are pockets of it. And I think Nicole Wallace is a pocket of it that is actually quite decent. Nevertheless, she's a former Republican, as you point out. But it is interesting to see that whole interview went out. And since that interview went out, no one's really covered the January the 6th piece of it. There's some clips out there about Maria was the one who was scapegoated, and there's all these other pieces, the sort of the more personal, interpersonal ones. But the national security ones, where you're like, hey, this guy was about to pin the entire January the 6th on the FBI with the help of the Speaker of the House. That's not got any mention anywhere. That's not been picked up anywhere in the last few hours since this interview's happened. That's very telling, in my opinion. And look, Maria Bartiromo obviously did a terrible job covering this whole thing. She obviously fell for
terrible job covering everything. She is more of a mob Wall Street propagandist of every like corrupt hustle on the street than she is a journalist. So
that's the reason why she was given that first job as the reporter on that floor. She was not going to harm anybody. They knew that. Yeah. So
didn't she start like a CNBC kind of a thing?
Yeah. She was CNBC market reporter on the floor of CNBC. That was her big claim to fame. Yeah.
Right. So, and it's interesting. The head of NBC's out too.
Right. Yes, that is interesting. And he was responsible for the BuzzFeed investment. So there's dots. You connect them. Thanks for reminding me that, because I was going to mention the BuzzFeed investment by NBC, which always struck me as being like this. It didn't feel right. BuzzFeed was fine, but it was like, first, the numbers of BuzzFeed never made any sense. Like like
a $2 billion valuation.
Yeah, the stupid lists and it's like, okay, how long is this going to last for? How many lists can you possibly come up with? If it's going to last you on a business model for 10 years, it's not going to happen.
It's almost like that was a construct, an excuse. This is a media company, and you had all this ability to like manipulate the numbers that could justify the money you could slew us in through private equity to go, see, this is a huge, very reputable media company, and it could come out of nowhere. It could come out of literal cat listicles. And then the money that got slewed in via private equity from offshore, then that could be explained away by these statistics that could be juiced up by stacks of Huawei phones sitting offshore.
Absolutely. All the traffic in the early days of the second iteration of the tech world, of the .com world, those numbers are not real. People don't get these millions and millions of views. They just don't. They don't get that. Half of them are bot created and the other half are paid for. It's just, there's no ways people have that much time. The actual reality of the numbers that people get are far lower. But because of this operation to juice up these numbers, only the biggest numbers, the million plus followers, those are the ones who got the attention, and those are the ones that became influencers. Those are the ones that were speaking from a political point of view or a particular point of view. There is also, she brings to the table, does Ms. Grossberg, an audio clip of Mr. Carlson.
Is New York a one-party state or a two-party state when it comes to audio wiretaps?
I think it's one party, but I can't be sure. But
an audio clip of Mr. Carlson emerged in which he says arranged marriages between adults and children are not the same thing exactly as pulling a child from a bus stop. Okay. So I just checked it out. It's a one-party state, so he didn't need there's not a felony just from this kind of thing. But what now is this? This is from this Abbey. This is paragraph 60 of a civil suit that Abbey Grossberg has got ready to go off the shelf.
Yeah,
Tucker got fired yesterday, right?
No, this is the civil, but he's based on this lawsuit. Based on this lawsuit that she filed, we think that.
When did she file this?
This was a few weeks ago. So. I have to give the exact date, but a few weeks ago. And she's got these additional tapes that came up in the last stages of discovery of the Dominion trial. I know you're acting like you're suspicious about her and her motives. I don't.
She's a long-term Fox employee, so she doesn't get any currency with me for integrity. Yeah. I'm sorry.
She doesn't have any. You're right about that, but nevertheless,
if you walk out of Deutsche Bank last week and I've got a tale to tell.
Anyone who works at Fox News, you just have to. You have to question. Nevertheless, these are tapes. These are actual tapes of him saying this. So there's culture in there. So maybe he's been scapegoated with these tapes. Maybe they.
I'm going to be pointillistic about this. These are allegations thus far that are not proven in a court of law yet. Now, if she's taking that from things that were already entered into the record in the Dominion lawsuit, is that what's happened here? So this is
this is some of the disputed stuff that happened in the discovery of the Dominion lawsuit, right? This was the. And this is why didn't Fox News fess up to having these tapes? And it's one of the reasons people suspect that Fox News landed up settling is because they didn't reveal these tapes, and now these tapes are going to make it even more complicated because they now had a.
That's where the judge lambasted them for not being forthcoming, and so they were about to get into sanctions, and then they were going to be asked to. Special masters would have gone through all the hard drives in that company and gone, give us everything, and I will decide what's admissible. But that. See, this is the problem when your media company is actually a spy agency.
Yeah.
It's so complicated, guys.
It really is. It really does get very complicated. And so, but now you're looking at this culture that these guys were creating inside this company, which was obviously then represented on the air. And you've got this kind of if it is, say, influenced by a spy operation, let's call it, or inspired by a spy agency of some form, what's the goal of creating an organization that is not only racist on the air, but also racist internally, that's like living and breathing racism? What is the goal behind that? And what were they doing to America throughout these last, I don't know how long Fox News has been around for, as they've been inserting themselves into the culture in a way that is just gross and racist, homophobic, and how many people have died, and how many wars have been launched, and how many things have happened based on this kind of this entity that was created wholly potentially by a guy who's not even American, and maybe with the help of a foreign intelligence. I'm so glad you've connected all those dots earlier on with the 538. I think that's a really important thing that's happening. This guy, again, when you think about elections in general, you rely on these pollsters, and for the last few times, the pollsters have gotten it wrong. Certainly before the previous election, they got it wrong. And so why did they get it wrong? And why did Nate Silver, why was his projections so completely off on that one, in the 2016 election? What was it that they got him so wrong? And
one of the reasons is that nobody had Cambridge Analytica SEL Group factored in.
Yeah.
Right? And which, now, here's the thing. Nate came out and took shots at me in 2017. Guy's got 2 million followers. I have fans, but I'm also the punchline to jokes that are on basic cable that year, which is quite a thing, guys. You go from being a respected professional on a very small scale to all of a sudden you're the punchline on various podcasts, even TV shows. Interesting. So, but whatever. It's like poop off a raincoat for me. But all of a sudden, you really notice when somebody is punching down at you. And so Nate Silver started punching down at me without engaging me. And I just went, oh, well, we're both forecasting professionals here. I had some questions for him back like September 2017. I was like, so, Mr. Silver, have you revisited your model from 2016 now that you know about this computational propaganda? Since clearly your model didn't include that, did you revisit it or apologize to your readers? And he was there. He was totally fine with using his corporate media power to try and punch down at my reputation. But he wasn't there in the public space to actually have a conversation between colleagues, because I have better bona fides than he does in terms of methodology. And my work has been going on longer and it's better. But it's funny. So what's a guy like that doing from his New York Times and ESPN and Disney Corp position, punching down at people who are far beneath him in the ranks, especially with work as faulty as his? Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I won't miss him much.
I wouldn't miss him much either. But the thing, and let me add this: that the pollsters have got it so wrong that they're all owned by the same company. By the way, all these polling companies are actually owned by the same company, essentially. And so you've got another opportunity there. I mean.
They're influence ops.
Yeah, they're all influence ops. So you imagine you've got this news network that's purveying a whole lot of bullshit to the voters. You've got voters who are basing their decisions based on polls that are a whole lot of bullshit as well. And Nate Silver, so brilliant Nate Silver, is getting it wrong. And then you land up with, hey, Donald Trump became the president because that's what the votes say. And everyone believes it because there's no way to check it. So you used to be able to check against polls. Used to be able to check against the newscasts. Now you just, well, okay, maybe that's possible. It's a crazy world. So there's a lot that needs to get fixed in that whole election business. Speaking of election business, guess who is running again? The Biden-Harris ticket will be a ticket in
Sleepy Grandpa Ice Cream. Freedom is making America great again.
Personal freedom is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred.
That's been the work of my first term. to fight for our democracy,
This shouldn't be a red or blue issue.
to protect our rights, to make sure that everyone in this country is treated equally and that everyone is given a fair shot at making it. Around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms, cutting Social Security that you paid for your entire life while cutting taxes for the very wealthy, dictating what health care decisions women can make, banning books, and telling people who they can love, all while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote.
What happens in this video?
When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are. The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election. Because I know America. I know we're good and decent people. I know we're still a country that believes in honesty and respect and treating each other with dignity. That we're a nation where we give hate no safe harbor. We believe that everyone is equal, that everyone should be given a fair shot to succeed in this country.
Thank you for choosing us.
Every generation of Americans has faced a moment when they have to defend democracy. Stand up for our personal freedom. Stand up for the right to vote and our civil rights. And this is our moment. So if you're with me, go to joebiden.com and sign up. Let's finish this job. I know we can. Because this is the United States of America. There's nothing, simply nothing we cannot do if we do it together.
Yeah.
Sleepy. Looks very sleepy.
This is some Rocky 2 shit that's about to go down here. This is.
I mean, if this is Trump and Biden, oh man, it's going to be one hell of a
It's not Trump and Biden. It's Xi and Biden.
Yeah, that's true.
Putin's down. Putin ain't even.
Yeah,
he's gone. Bibi's practically not there. He's only got one ass left to kick all the way, and that's Xi Jinping.
Yeah. I think they were 100% correct there. I mean, I think Bibi's gone. Bibi can't survive.
Bibi's fucked.
He can't survive this. He can't survive the.
He had his supporters tearing down the Israeli flag on Independence Day. That's 2 or 3 levels beyond January 6th in terms of like optics.
Yeah.
January 6th was very awful, but they didn't do it on fucking July 4th. Like they're Ben Gvir and all those guys. They're fucked. They're gone.
Yeah, and the resistance there, the protesters there are just standing firm, and they're just determined to continue to defend their country, and they're not going to let him do anything. They're not going to let him get away with anything.
When I saw the grandmothers come out, I was like, and it just came to me in a dream. I was like, boobies against Bibi. Oh, it's over. When the boobies and Sadies are in the streets, you're dead.
That'll be a happy day here as soon as Bibi Netanyahu is out of power. I'll declare my bias on that one. I'm not a fan of that man.
But Biden here, nobody's really saw coming. I think we're pretty lucky about it.
I saw him coming. I predicted it in 2017. I said he's the only guy who can win, and he's the only guy who can save America because I just believed him, and I said it
I knew he was sticking around. I knew he was sticking around and doing the work, so that's good.
Yeah, so there you go.
Look, I mean, and I hope we get. I hope we get an even more fucked efficient and flagrant Biden. I do. Okay. So remember when he's with DeSantis, and it's definitely hot mic, right? I think this is like during the Surfside condo collapse. He goes down in person, And
might have been the storms. Might have been the storms afterwards. It might have been the.
It could have been. It could have been. Yeah,
something like that.
But yeah, he's got the guy in the Harley Davidson T-shirt, and he goes and he's on the hot mic, and he's been doing this for 40 plus years. He knows these things, and he goes, "Yeah, I tell people you don't fuck with a Biden," and that's Joe from Scranton and Delaware. That's my boy right there. That guy, the Irish guy who, like, you know what? I hope he just lets it all hang out. It's like he says some dumb stuff. He like trips over words occasionally. He drops F-bombs. He just gets it done because he knows what all the targets are. He knows who his friends are and where his enemies live. And that's why you want sex and politics are the only two activities where a lack of experience somehow seems attractive, and it's not in either.
In many other cases, I would say. The thing is about presidents in their second terms, they do not have to give a shit. They can just do what they need to do, and he will do what he needs to do to get the job done, as he says there, and I have no doubt that's what he'll do. It's been an impressive first term under the extraordinary circumstances, and he has
brought so many malign powers into just, we will totally behave here. He's got an SEC, Gary Gensler. He's basically dismantled cryptocurrency. He is completely mangling offshore banking screw jobs. Don't try and sneak around sanctions on his watch. He'll bust you. We did North Korean sanctions today, huge. And there's a bunch of virtual currency exchanges that are mentioned in that document. And the Chinese are mentioned in this, and Singaporeans are mentioned. And I got $5 that says you're going to see Binance and FTX, and cryptocurrency is going to be gone. Gone before the next election. He's got the drug makers making insulin for $35. He's no, you don't get to do this. You don't get to shove people full of Snickers bars and give them type 2 diabetes and make them fat and then charge them $1,000 a month for insulin. Right. You don't get to do that. So I know you screwed with drug. I know you did this. I know you did that. I can shut your companies down. I can break you up into 18 pieces, or you can give people insulin for $35 or I'll break your knees. Do it. He's got Putin, you don't even hear Putin's name anymore. And he's just negotiating from a point of strength with Xi Jinping. That's a hell of a lot for any president to accomplish when you inherit the seditious conspiracy that tried to keep you from taking office in the first place. This guy's got this done in 2.5 to 3 years.
You also
have the most amazing bureaucratic job in our history.
Yeah, an entire opposition that isn't even answerable to the American people, but it seems to be answerable to a foreign country or foreign countries. That's to be able to pass legislation like he has done in the last few years with the tiny majority. It's just incredible. It's incredible stuff that he's been able to pull off. And people have been criticizing, but really.
I'd like to take it back. I think there are 3 analogs in American history where you've had this much work come together to set this nation on a course, and a right course, and that is George Washington going from fighting the British to setting up the nation to begin with. Lincoln inherited a shit show. He inherits chaos from Buchanan. The country breaks apart. He musters the Union Army, and the officers weren't really ready for that. They should have won McClellan. No, we could get into that. It was not easy. And Lincoln not only puts U.S. Grant in charge, gets the Southerners to surrender before too much more time goes on, and brings them back into the Union and sets us on an uneasy course that he gets us back on the right track. FDR inherits the collapse of the 20s, the roaring 20s economy, the Great Depression, and then he rescues us from that, sets us on a course to not only defeat the Axis powers in World War II, but really sets up the American century. And in a few years, and I think Biden is the next one in that line. I think he's the 4th who takes a very weak, precarious position where America's in trouble, and in 3 years has just whipped this country up in terms of its leadership and its institutional integrity. It's not perfect if anything, it's more identified a lot of the places that are falling behind or that have not met the mark.
And Biden is also setting it up for the next generation. There's a groundswell of young people who are entering politics that are principled and determined and are fully registered by all accounts. They are going to continue they're going to inherit a much better America from Joe Biden than they would have from any other president. And they'll have a clean slate in which to build an incredible future And that is the generation that is not bothered by Biden's age at all. They're quite happy to have the experienced guy in there right now because they know that he knows what he's doing.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.